Hello and welcome. My name is Stephanie Mortel.
And I'm Ruochen Lil.
Hello, I'm Daniel.
And hi, I'm Nikki, and this is our project on a max heap approach to simplified food web modeling. And before we dive in, it is important to define some of the concepts we will discuss in this presentation. In ecology, a food chain is the hierarchical series of species that are each dependent on the next as a food source. Food webs, however, aren't so simple as food chains. In fact, the complexity of a food web increases significantly with each species added, as it is a system of multiple interlocking food chains. A trophic system, or trophic dynamic, is the principle in ecology that allows us to understand the passage of energy within a food web. An organism's trophic status is defined by various terms, including primary producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and so on, depending on how large that food web is. Primary producers are organisms that obtain their energy from the sunlight and are the first trophic level that we see in this web, those little green dots. The next trophic level are primary consumers, commonly known as herbivores, as their energy comes from consuming the producer. The next trophic levels, secondary and tertiary consumers, are commonly referred to as carnivores, as they will eat from the trophic level before their own. And this pattern will continue depending on the size of the trophic system being analyzed. So when we were presented with the final project proposal, our group agreed to examine trophic dynamics and how we can approach changing ecological factors using a max heap. This project aims to explore the intricate dynamics of food webs and their implications for ecosystem stability. This is of immense relevance in today's world, as human activity and environmental changes have had a significant impact on biodiversity and ecological balance. With the current state of the biodiversity crisis, scientists are attempting to determine the most prudent allocation of conservation resources. Though our scope for this project is limited, by delving into the interdependencies of species within a food web, we seek to examine the complexity of these systems and to determine whether or not we are able to identify a species that contributes the least to the overall stability and therefore could be removed with minimal impact on the ecosystem as a whole. So, given the time frame of this project, we are making several assumptions here. Food webs, even in our simplest environment, can be incredibly complex. For this reason, we have selected an arbitrary aquatic food web that places humans at the top, at that highest trophic level. Additionally, we are applying the trophic statuses of each species based on their eating behavior defined in the food web that is shown on a later slide. As a concept, what we're hoping to explore in this project is rather large. There are entire fields of study that are exploring biodiversity conservation and how to best allocate resources. So within the scope and the nature of max heaps, we have to take a smaller, more manageable bite out of the picture. When we examine the food web stability, we will be examining the rebalancing efforts of if a species is entirely wiped out, a node is entirely taken out. And with regard to the max heap, we are making a few assumptions as well. The species that are chosen for this project will create a complete binary tree. We are only associating one predator with two prey to fulfill the binary tree requirement, though food webs, as we know, are much more complex than that. It's not a strict hierarchy in reality. Organisms can also belong to multiple trophic levels, but we are just assigning one integer value for each species to simplify this model. And again, with the sense of time and the scope of the project, this binary tree will have 4 trophic levels.
So why are we considering a max heap approach? First, let's do a quick review of what a heap is. A heap is a complete binary tree that maintains a heap property. A complete binary tree has no gaps between its leaf nodes, and a heap is often represented as an array. Here in this example, we have an array with indices 1 to 7 that contains nodes A through G. This is useful because given a current index of I for a node, you can keep track of the indices of its parent and child nodes. Left child would be at 2 times I, right child at 2 times I plus 1, and the parent node at the floor value of I divided by 2. In the case of a max heap, the heap property to be maintained is that the value of each node is less than or equal to the value of its parent. And ultimately, we are using a max heap approach as our initial thought was that a max heap property can mirror the hierarchical nature of an ecosystem, with parent-child nodes in a heap mirroring the predator-prey relationships, with the trophic level of a predator always being greater than that of the trophic level of its prey. We were also thinking that node deletion would be able to represent species removal, and the subsequent number of swaps needed to rebalance the heap would in some way measure the impact of removing a species on the particular ecosystem we are examining. So, for the sake of example, we are going to use this more specific example of a food web which was discussed earlier. This is an aquatic food web that delineates 4 different trophic levels with tertiary consumers up top, then secondary consumers, and so on until we have producers at the bottom. Then we are going to pick out species to create a binary tree of species nodes. We are assigning humans the max value of trophic level 4, then secondary consumers like larger fish species yellow perch and lake sturgeon are assigned trophic level 3, and so on and so forth until we get to the trophic level 1 producers who serve as the foundation of this food web.
Here is an illustration of a max heap binary tree. Each node represents a species, and the number behind the name of the species corresponds to its trophic level. Since we already have the species sorted by their descending trophic levels, we can easily construct a max heap by arranging the nodes accordingly. We start by placing the species with the highest trophic level human at the root of the tree, then we proceed to insert other species one by one while maintaining the max heap property.
To recap that, we wanted to show you some of our Java code and output, which we can explain in more detail later. But for now, we created an array of species nodes and then used it to create a max heap.
When we delete the root of the max heap human with trophic level 4 to see how many steps it takes to rebalance it, we replace it with the last element algae with trophic level 1 to maintain the heap's completeness property. Then we need to restore the max heap property by repeatedly heapifying the last node placed at the position of the root. Here we can see that yellow perch with trophic level 3 is greater than algae's trophic level 1, so we swap them. We repeat the process one more time until the max heap is rebalanced. In total, it took us 3 operations to rebalance our max heap after we deleted the root.
And here we can see yellow perch is now at index 1, pouch snail has moved to index 2, and algae has moved to index 4 for a total of 3 swaps.
Now we delete the second node of the max heap, yellow perch with trophic level 3. Since deleting an element at any intermediary position in the heap can be costly, so we can simply replace the element to be deleted by the last element, algae, and delete the last element of the heap. Then repeatedly heapify the node until we rebalance the max heap. Here we needed 2 operations to restore the max heap property.
And here we can see pouch snail has moved to index 2 and algae has moved to index 4 for a total of 2 swaps.
To delete the 6th node of the max heap, start with trophic level 2. Similarly, we replaced it with the last element algae and deleted it. Then heapified it until we rebalanced the max heap. This process took only 1 operation to complete.
And here we can see algae has moved to index 6 for a total of 1 swap.
For the 11th node, fungi with trophic level 1, we replaced it with the last element of the heap algae with a node to be deleted. This process also took just 1 operation to complete.
Here, algae has moved to index 11 for a total of 1 swap.
When deleting the last element of the max heap, there were no other operations needed as it was the last element in the heap.
And here it returns 0 operations or 0 swaps with a node at index 15 removed.
As already shown in our visual representation, here are 2 main parts of our algorithms in more detail. First is to identify the node or the species, here we're referring to delete, and replace it with the last node of this max heap. The second part is to rebalance the heap by rearranging each node, a process which always takes a time complexity of log n. Thus, we have these 2 core functions shown above. The first one is the delete function. The second one is the heapify function. As already discussed, the delete function is mainly do the switch between the node and the last node, and then do a heapify here. After we delete the node and replace it with the last node, we take a look at the max heapify function, which is basically a recursion function as it's already a max heap, so our last node will never be larger than its parent node. We will just need to look at its children behind it. So we take a look at it and compare it with the left child and right child and move it to a lower level. And then we max heapify the thing, the left or the right child we just switched. After this recursion function is done, we rebalance the heap. And then we will talk about the result and analysis. This table summarizes the number of operations required for the max heap to get rebalanced when deleting each of the 16 nodes. We can take a closer look at it and figure out the root node will take more steps compared to its two children, and then the third level node will need less rebalance compared to the second level node. And it goes on and on. We can clearly come to a conclusion that in general, nodes higher up requires more operation, and nodes lower in heap can be removed with a minimal effect. Thus, our model suggests that a removal of a species at higher trophic levels has more significant impact in our ecosystem. And continue to take a look at our time complexity. Our initial approach to find the node to be deleted would have involved a full traversal of the heap, adding a time complexity of ON in this worst case scenario. To optimize this, we employ the hash map function that could locate the node's index directly, reducing the time complexity to O1. Therefore, the total time complexity of our algorithm will just be O log n for both deletion and rebalance.
So to conclude, through our work and our research, noticed that there were a few limitations to this modeling of a heap web through a max heap. One of them is all species within the same trophic level have the same integer assignment as it corresponds to their trophic status, which is unusual for a binary tree.
The second limitation would be our binary tree reflect a 1:4:8 ratio among the trophic levels, which is oversimplified structure, as animals in level 1 are way more compared to level 4.
The third limitation here is that we make each node independent of each other. However, in real life, one species really can influence another in a much more complex, convoluted kind of way.
So based on these limitations, we're thinking that perhaps a better representation of food webs would have been a network flow, so we could better analyze the trophic dynamics of the web when a species is eliminated.
And finally, as interesting of an exercise as it was to examine a natural system through a max heap, we fully understand that this cannot be reliably or scientifically applied, as balance within a binary tree does not necessarily equate to the stability within an ecosystem. Thank you for your time. These are our references.